All right, it is time to learn about the cell. Sounds like some kind of horror movie. The cell. Okay, so cells are the basic structural and functional unit of every organism that is alive. So life equals cells. So cells are the smallest unit of life. Two main types of cells, prokaryotic or eukaryotic. So organisms in domain bacteria and archaea are prokaryotic cells, and these guys by far rule the earth. So many more prokaryotic cells on earth than there are eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells are kind of the rest of the domains, domain eukarya. There's an R in there. So protists, fungi, animals, plants, those are all our eukaryotic cells. So what's the difference? First, let's look at some similarities. So comparing prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So basic feature of all cells, what makes a cell a cell? Got to have a plasma membrane so we can delineate the external from the internal, create that stable internal environment. A semi-fluid substance called cytosol. You guys may have heard this referred to as cytoplasm. We'll talk about the difference between cytosol and cytoplasm. Actually, we could talk about it now. Cytosol is just the juice, the semi-fluid substance. If you call it cytoplasm, it's the cytosol plus organelles. Okay, so there is a difference between cytosol and cytoplasm, although we will sort of use those terms interchangeably in class. Okay, all cells have chromosomes. We've got to have DNA, tell us what to do. And all cells have ribosomes to make proteins. So these four things are in every cell. Okay, now prokaryotic cells, prokaryotic comes from Greek, pro meaning before, and karyo actually means kernel, but we sort of use that to mean nucleus. So before the nucleus. So no nucleus in a prokaryotic cell. That's kind of like the defining characteristic of a prokaryotic cell. Does still have DNA, but it is in an unbound region. So it's in a region called the nucleoid. So the nucleoid isn't an organelle. It's just an area of the cell where the DNA lives in a prokaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cells have no membrane-bound organelles, including the nucleus, and pardon me. It has a cytoplasm bounded by the plasma membrane. So let's look at a prokaryotic cell. And they're pretty simple. All of your bacteria are prokaryotic cells. So here's a cartoon right here. And you see this pretty simple, not much inside, a couple little ribosomes. Here's my chromosome, this purple squiggly stuff. The nucleoid is just the area where the chromosome is. So wherever the chromosome is, that's the nucleoid. This is like an electron micrograph of an actual prokaryotic cell. A little bacteria. All right, so now let's go to eukaryotic cells. So again, from the Greek, eu meaning with, and then karyo, again, we're going to use that to mean nucleus. So with a nucleus. So, oddly enough, eukaryotic cells have DNA in a nucleus that is bounded by a membranous outer envelope. So we're looking at membrane-bound organelles interior to the cell. Okay, the cytoplasm exists in a region between the plasma membrane and the nucleus. It's not throughout the whole cell. Eukaryotic cells are generally much larger than prokaryotic cells. If you'll watch, so say this is a eukaryotic cell, like prokaryotic cells would be just kind of little dudes hanging out next to eukaryotic cell, much larger. All right, the plasma membrane is a very important part. So important, we're going to spend an entire chapter on it next. But it's a selective barrier, and that's kind of its shtick that makes it so awesome. It's selective. It decides what goes in and what doesn't go in. It allows things in, awesome things like oxygen, nutrients, and allows those in and waste out. And it basically is the road by which the volume of the interior contents of the cell get everything or get rid of anything. Okay. Pardon me. General structure of a biological membrane is a double layer of phospholipids. So let's look a little cross section. Ta-da! So here is our cross section of membrane. You see it's a double layer of our phospholipids. Okay, one layer with the heads on this side, heads on that side, tails in the center. Okay, so again, the heads face the hydrophilic region because they have a phosphate group on there, which makes them polar. And then the tails are those fatty acid chains, so they are very hydrophobic. And they create this internal layer right here, and that creates a barrier. Okay, because there's an aqueous environment outside and an aqueous environment inside. And it creates this barrier between, and that is the miracle of the plasma membrane, why it works so great and why it kind of can establish life, basically. Now, phospholipids, as you see, are not the only thing in a membrane. Membranes are mosaics of lots of different molecules, mostly phospholipids, but there's carbohydrates, there's proteins, there's all kinds of good stuff kind of swimming around in the membrane. And we'll talk about what they do in the next chapter. All right, so here is kind of a good point. Metabolic requirements set upper limits on the size of cells. And this kind of goes back to what I just said a couple minutes ago, that the plasma membrane is like a road in and out of the cell. So it lets good things in, kicks bad things out, and it serves the volume of the cell. And if you look, the surface area to volume ratio of a cell is very important. If a cell gets too big, right, the surface area increases by a factor of n to the second, but volume increases much faster, exponentially faster, by a factor of n to the third. So think about it this way. So New York City, Manhattan, is an island, right? So there's like bridges and tunnels to get on and off. So we can't service the population of New York unless, if it grows, unless we add more bridges, add more tunnels and things like that to get things on and off. So imagine if we doubled the population of Manhattan, but didn't add any more bridges or tunnels to get things on and off. It would not work. So the cell works kind of the same way. All right. Smaller cells are more ideal. They have a greater surface area relative to volume ratio, and they can feed the contents of the cell and get rid of wastes much more efficiently. So this kind of, look here a little bit, excuse me. So we want to have a high surface area to volume ratio, closer to 6. If we get 1.2, it's just not enough of a ratio in order to serve the area of the cell. So smaller cells are better. Panoramic view of the eukaryotic cell. We're going to look at the next 2 slides, just some kind of overview of an animal cell and a plant cell, to look at the organelles inside. Okay, eukaryotic cell, again, has internal membranes that partition the cell into organelles. So, and plant and animal cells have mostly the same organelles. There's a couple that are different that you'll need to remember. So let's look. Here's an animal cell. Animal. That's like gibberish. It doesn't even look like the word animal. A-N-I-M-A. So here's an animal cell. Some highlights. Here's the nucleus. It's chromatin inside, and nucleolus, which is where ribosomes are made. Nuclear envelope is the membrane of the nucleus. Our plasma membrane, external membrane. Ribosomes are these tiny little dots here. They're on the ER. They're floating around. Okay, Golgi is for packaging and sorting. We're going to go over all of these. Lysosome down here for getting rid of waste. Mitochondria, energy. We really don't worry about peroxisomes until later. We're not actually going to do anything on the cytoskeleton. Centrosome, this little guy here, to help us make microtubules, and then endoplasmic reticulum. There's both rough and smooth, and rough has ribosomes and smooth does not. And then if you look at a plant cell, pretty easy to tell them apart. Plant cells look like boxes. Animal cells are more amorphously shaped, and it has a lot of the same thing. Nucleus is the same, rough ER, smooth ER, Golgi, mitochondria, plasma membrane. Okay. And ribosomes, but there are a couple of things that are different. There's a vacuole. Again, we don't care about the cytoskeleton. Chloroplast for photosynthesis. Cell wall to help with reinforcing the cell and giving the plant structure. And we're going to go over all these different organelles in the next screencast. So that's it. Introduction to the cell, and we're ready to go.